I would credit much of the success I've had to learning how to write and to practicing writing. And the reason for that is that without writing, it's very hard to freeze your thinking on paper so that you can sharpen it, so that you can see where you're using words that aren't well defined, where you're saying things that don't need to be said. All of this will help everything else. I remember in college, for instance, when I took a class with John McPhee, an incredibly gifted writer and teacher, all of my grades in every other class went up because every extraneous bit of information that was hurting instead of helping me was taken out. So to sharpen the saw, a couple of different approaches. Write anything whatsoever, stream of consciousness, essay, doesn't really matter. Let's just call it 1 to 3 pages, something along the lines of morning pages.
Need motivation?
Watch a top 10 with Believe Nation.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because I need them, because I want to wake up every single day and get pushed by somebody who's doing a lot more than me. And in watching their videos, it inspires me to be bolder, to have more courage, and to go chase down the life of my dreams. And I hope it does the same for you. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Tim Ferriss, and my take on his top 10 rules of success. Enjoy.
You can see your thinking on paper. That accomplishes 2 things. Number 1, it takes the anxieties and nebulous worries in your head, puts them down in a freeze frame so that you can kind of trap them in the printed form so you can get on with the rest of your day. The second thing it does is it allows you to see where you are sharp and where you are dull in your thinking. Now, if you are drafting, as I do, for instance, right now, once a week, writing, if you are looking for a proofreader, and you do need a proofreader, if you can't find a professional writer, because we can't all find professional writers, talk to friends who have any type of legal training. Or you could even hire a lawyer to do this, or a paralegal, someone with a law degree. They are trained to look at language very, very carefully, because in a dispute, in a negotiation, in a disagreement, arbitration, it's going to come down to the wording of contracts. And I have found that when I do not have access to professional writers, it is oftentimes just as good or even better to get lawyers or people with legal training to read my writing. So that would be a workaround that I accidentally discovered that is very powerful.
Rule number 2 is practice a low information diet.
What's a takeaway or lesson you wish more of us listeners paid attention to / followed through with? I would say in this day and age, probably the low information diet as described in the 4-Hour Workweek. I mean, here's my phone here. I have not had any social apps on this phone in 2 years. And that's not because I broadcast that for sitting on my moral high horse. It's because I understand that it is playing a dangerous game to assume that you can use willpower and self-control. At the very least, it is exhausting, and you can save your mental calories for something more important. To have this type of addictive technology embedded into your phone with notifications that you're subject to 24/7, through which algorithms are being wielded against you that have billions of dollars and teams of data scientists and UI experts behind them. I think it's unnecessarily challenging to subject yourself to that and to expect to be able to overtake that and single task effectively. Much like, and some people say like, well, I have better self-control. You can just use self-control. That may be true, but I could also have junk food littered all over my house. And I could make the same argument. I could say, well, if I have enough self-control, I won't eat the junk food. But it's a hell of a lot easier just to remove all the junk food from your house. So I do think the low information diet, this applies not just to social media, but certainly any type of push news, which could just be reactively picking up the newspaper every day when you go to grab a cup of coffee at a gas station or something like that. It doesn't need to be digital, but the low information diet, I think, is very much underestimated in its power. And if you can single task for a few hours a day without any interruption, which is why I use Do Not Disturb and so on my laptop as well as frequently as I do. And my phone is almost always on airplane mode. you will have a huge competitive advantage over the majority of people who are, let's just call them knowledge workers, anyone who works on a computer. If you have the ability to single task for, let's just call it 3 hours a day in a single block of time, you have an unbelievable competitive advantage. So I would say the low information diet.
Rule number 3 is be skeptical.
What would you put on a billboard? And maybe, how you answer that is a reflection on how you've changed or grown since the last time I saw you.
So last time I saw you, my answer probably would have been, you're the average of the 5 people you associate with most, something like that, right? Pick your social circle very wisely. That includes virtual or parasocial relationships, by the way, like the people you follow on YouTube or podcasts. Choose carefully. The answer I would give now, I'm going to crib directly from a former guest of mine, Dr. BJ Miller, who's helped 1,000 plus, probably 2,000 plus people to transition to death and hospice care. Fascinating guy. And I think he got it from a bumper sticker, but it's great. And I think it sort of wraps everything nicely for me right now, which is don't believe everything you think. Like, don't believe everything you think. Really take a second to interrogate those things. Look for counter evidence. And there's so many stories, so many beliefs, right, which are thoughts we take to be true, that we've repeated for so long that they've become the subconscious 10 commandments through which we live our lives. And it's an ongoing process, but don't believe everything you think.
Rule number 4 is start journaling.
I practice mindfulness and gratitude, but still can't find a way to temper my drive, feel satisfied, and enjoy the present moment. How do I slow down and enjoy life again without being so focused on the future? Okay, so if I take a look at this, there are 2 things that jump out at me. And the first is you say, and enjoy life again. What that implies to me is that you have enjoyed life before. In other words, what you're striving to be able to do, you've already done at some point. So I think journaling on that, even if it's several days in a row, in the morning, longhand, stream of consciousness, something along the lines of morning pages. And I suggest you just look up my name in morning pages, and that'll give you a lot on how I think about these things and use these things. That would be step number 1.
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight all of the lessons learned in this video, as well as pull out our 3 favorite learnings and quotes that will inspire you to actually do something. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there. Rule number 5 is take cold plunges.
I've been, and still am, a fervent believer in cold therapy. So using ice baths as a means of controlling inflammation, as a means of mood elevation.
Oh, mood elevation, big time.
Oh, it's unbelievable. And generally, my approach has been to get a chest freezer of some type and fill it with ice, etc.
Yeah.
And that works, but they get really disgusting really quickly. And
they all do, dude. I bought one of the machines, the real pro ones.
Yeah, and then you're stuck with this thing that is an eyesore, and you don't know what to do with it.
I tried to sell it, I couldn't.
Yeah, so I ended up, because I realized how much of how significant a lever this is for improving my quality of life, just on a daily basis. Like, and I'll backstep for a second and just say one thing that I learned from Tony Robbins, to give him credit, and I don't know if he came up with this, but is this sequence of state, story, strategy. So it's like, fix your state first. Only then can you come up with an enabling story, and only then can you come up with an effective strategy. Because if you're like feeling and you're sleep deprived and you're kind of depressed or anxious or whatever, you try to come up with a strategy, meaning how to fix something, you're not going to come up with a good strategy, generally speaking. So it's like fix your physical state first. Then you can come up with an enabling story, then come up with an effective strategy. So the state piece is very important. There aren't that many ways I have found to change state. Exercise is one, but it requires generally a fair amount of time. Heat is also effective, but again, generally requires, say, it doesn't sound like much, but it's like 15 to 30 minutes, let's just say, in a sauna. Very effective. Cold is the fastest. It's just the fastest for me. And I've gone without cold therapy because I've not wanted to get some huge chest freezer or a pro model. I am also going to be getting a pro model.
Rule number 6 is embrace vulnerability.
And we get to have this conversation about those experiences and then share them with broad audiences. And I think that's really a gift. And my sense is that this has kind of enhanced your sense of purpose and given you a deeper meaning in the work that you do.
It definitely has given me a second wind, in a sense, or a focusing function with a lot of what I've done in the last handful of years. It's crazy to think that it's only been 5 or 6 years since then. I'm still stuck on that a bit because it just feels like it's been so long.
Yeah.
Not in a negative way. Brings up separate questions we probably don't want to get into about time dilation and our experience of time and things like that. I mean, you can live longer just by changing your experience of your day-to-day life, which I think is a non-trivial thing. I'm not going to take us too far down that side alley, but if you bring more of your faculties and sensitivities back online, or if you simply develop those things, your perception of time broadens, which is kind of interesting. It's like if you're doing a lot of things physically to extend your lifespan, you might want to think about the experiential side as well. So that's a footnote for me to reflect on later. Yes, it's given me a lot of focus, and it's also raised a lot of questions that I have wanted to explore publicly, in the sense that my inclination previously with all the various books, right, 4-Hour Workweek, 4-Hour Body, 4-Hour Chef, whatever it might be, I'm doing years of research, taking years of notes, interviewing dozens of experts, and then come to my conclusions. And I say, here are my conclusions. Here's the index card, although my index cards tend to be 600 pages long, but putting that aside, here's the index card. And what I've come to believe, at least with the long form audio format, is I think it is more helpful, particularly with something like mental health, to share the process and the struggles and some of the confusion and the dead ends, so that people not only end up hopefully with something they can use in the end, but they don't feel as alone in the struggle.
Rule number 7 is get better sleep.
What did you implement from Andrew Huberman's advice on sleep? I followed a bunch of his recommendations, and it has dramatically improved my sleep. Here are a few of them. So I did take his advice to get my fish oil consumption up to the point that it is at least 1 gram of EPA. And there's EPA, DHA contained in fish oil, among possibly other things, and getting the EPA to at least 1 gram. I do that in 2 divided doses taken with meals. Before sleep, I'm taking magnesium threonate, which selectively targets brain tissue, or at least is well absorbed by brain tissue. Apigenin is another. I believe I'm taking 50 milligrams, but you should listen to the full podcast. And other supplements that I'm taking, which I have to disclose because I started taking them around the same time, and perhaps these are the causal agents, quite apart from his advice. Following a number of blood tests, it was recommended to me that I begin taking, and this was recommended to me by my doctors, so get your own medical advice, please. I started taking higher levels of B6 in the morning. And also in the morning, I began doing 2 things as suggested by Andrew. Number 1, I began getting outside as soon as I got up. So no dilly-dallying and burning an hour inside. Getting outside, exposed to the sun, even if it's through cloud cover, for the first, say, 5 to 15 minutes of the day. And I had been doing this on some level, often jumping rope for even 2 or 3 minutes, really just to wake up the system and to get that exposure to the sun. I've made that a must do. And I've also delayed my intake of caffeine for 60 to 90 minutes after getting up. I think like a lot of people, my routine was to wake up and immediately consume some form of stimulant or caffeine, whether it's yerba mate or coffee or otherwise. And the point he made is, and I'm paraphrasing, that when you wake up, there is this natural and desirable production of cortisol, which then does a number of things, including, I imagine, breaking down glycogen into usable glucose and so on and so forth. And this provides you with a jolt of energy to start your day. And that is an important, what they might call, Zeitgeber, or a time giver, that helps to establish a bookmark for the rest of your circadian rhythm, and that can dictate and inform your sleep later. So pushing off the caffeine for 60 to 90 minutes allows your body to do what it's supposed to do without supplementation, without any type of caffeine replacement therapy, if that makes any sense.
Rule number 8 is exercise.
What is your workout routine these days? My workout routine is super simple. I go to the gym and I lift weights, doing full body workouts. And it's called twice a week. That's weight training. I have a sled, a weighted sled that I push, I would say 3 to 4 times per week in the morning, usually after my first cold brew. And I am intermittent fasting at the moment, where I will effectively not have anything to eat until noon. I say effectively because sometimes I will have a few macadamia nuts or something like that, but generally no calories to very, very low calories. So I'm intermittent fasting in the morning, and I'm doing kettlebell swings. Right now, I think I'm using a 72 pounder for sets of 50, and really just doing one set of like 50 to 100 reps twice a week. And I jump rope in the mornings, oftentimes before I do the sled pushing, just as a way to wake up my nervous system and my cognition. Honestly, just jumping rope for 2 minutes, hopping around, having my dog bark her face off at me, which is hilarious, is enough to change my mood, to elevate mood. Sauna, probably 4 to 5 times a week, generally before dinner. So let's just say I'm eating at 7 o'clock. I will finish up my day, my work day at 5 or 5:30, do the sauna for a half hour, and then take a cold shower post. That's about it. I mean, it's nothing crazy. If I go for a hike with my dog, which I do pretty regularly, if the weather permits, I will throw on a rucksack. I have a Go rucksack for an hour hike. I'm not using crazy weight. Also, because this rucksack does not have a waist strap, so I am supporting all the weight on my traps and shoulders. Usually use 35-pound weight, but you'll notice none of this takes more than, I mean, the weight training at the gym is going to take the most time because of the transit. There are weeks when I just skip that altogether and I'll do the other things I described. But we're talking about at most 30 minutes a day. Unless it's an activity that doesn't function for me exclusively as exercise, like an hour-long hike with my dog, then I'm just throwing on weights to get some additional stimulation. But that's what the workout looks like these days.
Rule number 9 is have self-awareness.
What is the internal monologue now in contrast to the negative prior version?
Goes up and down. Goes up and down. I would say I have more awareness of my thoughts and emotions now, so I can look at them and to myself say, I notice that I'm having the thought X as opposed to being X. Does that make sense?
Sure.
And there are many ways to approach this. I think the introductory course on the Waking Up app with Sam Harris, it's very basic. I'm going through the introductory course again. And not that I'm some lama or yogi, but I've done a fair amount of meditating. And still, I'm like, you know what? My foul shots are rusty. I need to just go back to basic. Complexity is super sexy and appealing. I think especially to smart people who are like, this is a problem. I'm good at solving problems. Let me find something really complicated. But sometimes you just need to like step on that line and shoot shots. My inner monologue is heavily dependent on having a sense of purpose, which over at least the last 5 years, I've been very fortunate to have with the mental health therapeutics. I think humans need purpose. It could be raking the garden. It does not really matter what that purpose is, but you need to feel like there is a focusing purpose. Need is a strong word. Most humans benefit from that. There are days, though, where particularly if there's certain factors at play, I didn't sleep well. It's really overcast. Because I didn't sleep well, I wake up groggy and it takes me a few hours to get going. And then I feel like I'm behind the 8 ball. Those days suck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then sometimes I'm like, you know what? It's been a while. Let me turn myself into a punching bag. Let's play that game.
Yeah.
So it still happens.
And rule number 10, the last one before some very special bonus clips, is cultivate self-love.
For my entire life, I viewed self-love, I think, as self-indulgent, in the sense that I felt it would be narcissistic and selfish and unproductive to feel or embrace or cultivate self-love in any way. And then, in fact, the way to drive myself was to constantly pick apart everything I was or did in a very brutal fashion in terms of internal monologue. And I think that is part of what drove me so close to the edge in college, is that incessant, abusive inner voice. And I got a lot done. I did a lot of things. And at the end of the day, who the cares? Really, right? Like in 200 years, we're all dust. No one's going to remember us. It doesn't matter.
Right.
So great. I got a better grade on my junior term paper. Who the cares, right? At the end of the day, that voice almost drove me to extinguish myself. So what I've also found is that looking back at the last 10 years, like how you treat yourself affects it in some way influences how you treat other people. So if you are violent and angry towards yourself, there will be an element of violence and anger towards other people, whether it comes out really obviously or it comes out in the form of like resentment and complaining and passive aggressiveness. It's going to manifest.
When did you know you were doing something versus just experiencing it?
Graduate, moved to California, Northern California, to be part of the tech pinball machine for serendipity. I actually think that was a very important decision, just geographically choosing where to be and then what to do being really secondary. Worked in data storage, selling storage area networks, had a desk and a fire exit, definitely not up to code. I remember it was really packed to the brim. Learned a lot about selling. I think everyone should have a service job, work in a restaurant or something like that, and have to sell for a period of time. You learn so much about human interaction. And I learned how to reach out to CTOs and CEOs and so on, how to reach them, playing the long game, not trying to sell a 7-figure system in one phone call. Yep. All of these things translated to many things later. I couldn't have seen that coming, but they did. Then I started this sports nutrition company. Long story. A lot of people here probably know some of the bare bones aspects of it from the 4-hour work week. That experience was simultaneous with a professor of mine, Ed Shao, who taught high-tech entrepreneurship at Princeton, which had a huge impact on me, inviting me back to guest lecture twice a year. And that went from 2003 to 2013 or so. Those notes later became the outline for the 4-hour work week.
How long did the startup exist?
Startup existed until, I want to say 2009 or so, when I sold the company. Not for any huge sum of money, but I sold the company around 2009. So.
And how long was that experience? 6 years?
The experience of building it?
Yeah.
I would say the building phase was the first 3 or 4 years. First year and a half, I had no idea what I was doing. I'd say the subsequent year and a half to 2 years was building out distribution, and then I became very bored with the entire thing and was looking for a graceful exit, which turns out, selling a company, even if it's for a very small sum of money, is one way to do something new.
Did you raise money or?
I bootstrapped the whole thing. So it was credit cards, savings, trying to play
buying remnant advertising against incoming revenue, getting prepayment from distributors. You will be the exclusive distributor featured in this print ad if you pre-purchase X amount, which would then give me the money to pay for the ad in the first place that I'd negotiated 80% off of because it was last minute, things of this type. So all of those games were what drove a lot of the growth, figured out that playbook, and then the focus really became trying to figure out what the hell I wanted to do when I grew up. I mean, I'm still doing that, I guess.
What did you learn from the startup? What were the key takeaways?
A few key takeaways from the startup were, number one, if you want to reach the decision makers, just call outside of business hours. So if you're actually cold calling, I was cold calling, smiling and dialing a lot, and cold emailing, then just do it before 8:30 and call after 6:30. And very often, even in a company of 100 people, you'll get one of the top brass answering the phone at the end, which was astonishing to me. Next, I would say, if you're going to talk to technical people, and I was not technical, but if you're going to talk to, say, VPs of engineering and CTOs, do your homework. And I ended up being really, really successful as a salesperson, not because I studied sales per se, but because I actually took the time to try to understand what RAID was, what all the bits and pieces were that made up the hardware, what use cases would lead to them using Solaris versus something else, and being able to guess correctly what their setup was without them telling me anything, which opened the door to more involved conversations. Those would be a handful of things, and the value of storytelling, ultimately, for everything. If you're a human,
I agree with that.
Storytelling is key. It's the crux.
I really, really, really enjoyed your ebook of the 17 questions to ask yourself. And I just wanted to ask if you could talk through some of those questions and where you came up with those.
Those 17 questions, I think they appear in Tools of Titans, maybe Tribe of Mentors, one of those two books. Those are questions that I have gathered over a few decades. And so I'd say number one is just borrow shamelessly. Whenever you come across a good question, capture it somehow. I do that. I collect questions. So if I'm reading an in-flight magazine and there's an interview and I'm like, terrible interview, but that question's really good. I will literally, I'm not proud of this, but I guess back in the day I would tear out the page. Now I just take a photograph, and sometimes they work. Sometimes they completely flub. They don't work at all. That happens too. Fix it in post. That's my recommendation. But those questions have helped me, so I return to them frequently. And this is top of mind because a younger friend of mine came to me asking me about these 17 questions. And he said, how do you come up with these questions? And I was like, well, first of all, you should notice that some of them are just stolen. And there's one, for instance, which is, am I hunting field mice or antelope? And
what does that mean?
Yeah. The whole story that goes around it is, if you're a lion, you can stay alive by hunting field mice and spending all of your time hunting field mice, but you're much better suited to going after big game and going through intense sort of sprints of focus that allow you to down real significant prey. And so it's just an easy metaphor to ask yourself, am I majoring in the minor things? Right. Am I really focused on the one or two things that could change everything, the one or two things that can make everything else easier or irrelevant? Or am I just scattered and doing every tiny task that grabs my attention because I don't have a forcing function? So that's one. Then there are others which are older for me, like, what if I did the opposite for 48 hours with respect to business process? Right. So if I'm checking email 10 times a day, what if I checked it no times a day for 48 hours? What else could I focus on? If I currently, and these aren't exactly opposites, but people will get the idea, to do something dramatically different from what you were currently doing. So if you really curtail, let's just say, the ability that your team has or an assistant to make decisions that are above a certain dollar threshold. Right? Let's just say you let them make decisions, but anything above $100 you want to have your say on, or $1,000 for whatever it might be. Like, what happens if you just completely rewrite that for something significantly higher?
I'm not saying you should do this. This is hypothetical. Right? Like, if you make it $10,000 for a week and you're like, all right, I'm going to keep an eye on it so it doesn't run out of control. Like, what actually happens? Chances are that whatever downside risk you had thought was a prohibitive risk that has led to this policy that actually is very draining for you personally and it makes you a bottleneck could be removed. There's very, very frequently. And once you stress test it by doing the opposite for say 48 hours or a week, whatever the time frame might be, you can remove it. Let's see. There are a whole lot of questions. Those are the ones that come to mind for me right now, I think, because they're relevant to decisions that I'm making probably in the next handful of months.
I got advice from a very, very experienced psychedelic facilitator at one point who said, take the pain and make it part of your medicine. And the way I think that applies here is we all experience pain. We all experience suffering. Many of us have experienced trauma of one type or another. And that can consume you. I mean, it can consume you. But it's like fire, right? It can consume you, but you can also harness it and use it for different things. And I know I'm not going to hedge. I'll say I know for a fact that there are people I've spoken to who are suicidal. And by the way, I'm not inviting everyone who's listening, if you are suicidal, to reach out to me because it won't work. I've had to disengage from that because it gets too heavy, right? Just to engage one-on-one with people who are suicidal. But there are resources in that post I mentioned, the practical thoughts on suicide. But let's just talk about closer friends. People you would never suspect in a million years who are this close to blowing their brains out. People folks would recognize in some cases. The fact that I was also there once is why they listen to me. Because unfortunately, I'm a subject matter expert, man. I have credibility. And that actually is very redeeming. It provides some meaning to the suffering that I experienced. It's like, okay, here I am. For whatever host of reasons, I am put in this place and time with this person. And they don't trust the input of these other people they're talking to because those people don't know what it's like. But I can look at this person in the eye and be like, oh, I know. And that's just a different thing. So you can find a way to transmute that pain into something meaningful, into a gift that hopefully you can share in some way. Not necessarily with the whole wide world. Just one person. That's a big deal. One person's a big deal. There's a lot out there that is intended for mass consumption that gets in front of millions of people. Doesn't really impact a single person very much. So even if you don't have a podcast, you don't have books, if you have the ability to sit down with one person and really make an impact, that's actually more meaningful than most of the crap that gets put out there.
On the fear side, fear setting first, I guess, made its public appearance, for me at least, in the 4-Hour Work Week. And I've continued to do it probably once a quarter, sometimes more frequently, depending on what neuroses has gripped me at the time. And it's very straightforward. So in the same way that you would goal set and make things specific, measurable, achievable, smart, right? Have time bound, et cetera. You're applying a lot of these same criteria to your fears. And therefore the name is fear setting, because the fears really exert the most paralysis and produce the most anxiety when they are nebulous.
Yeah.
When they are unclear, when you're just in a room of psycho-emotional smoke. And there are some easy ways to clear that out. Naming your fear allows you to defang it in some interesting ways. And this is directly borrowed from it's a slightly user friendlier version or more concrete version of something called premeditatio malorum, which is an exercise from Stoicism. Seneca the Younger has written extensively about this, but the power of negative visualization. In other words, the benefits of imagining
the worst case scenario. And some people might say, and I run into this sometimes, they're like, well, like you're just going to manifest the worst thing if you're constantly focused on that. It's not to constantly focus on it. The only way you can avoid constantly focusing on it, I think, is by kind of trapping it on paper in a way that lets you see how manageable most of your fears are.
Let's just take personal outsourcing as an example. I can't do it. I have a boss. I would get fired. Okay. First of all, I don't distinguish between work or business and personal time, in so much as if you're misspending that time, whether it's on household chores on the weekend when you've put in 80 hours from Monday to Friday, or checking email to simulate forward motion as opposed to defining your measurable objectives, those are both wastes of time. So if you have a job and there's absolutely no way you can apply outsourcing that job, which we can question in a second, that still means, let's say your son has a birthday party on Sunday, he wants the equivalent of this season's Tickle Me Elmo, which is impossible to find, rather than spending your entire Saturday going from store to store over, let's say, a period of 5 hours to find the toy, you could call or email Ask Sunday, go to asksunday.com, and for $40 to $50 a month, have 30 inquiries. This would be one. You call them, you say, here's my zip code, call every toy store within a 10-mile radius, find this toy, make a reservation or purchase it using my credit card, and have it held behind the counter. Call me when it's ready, tell me where to pick it up. And that would save you 4 to 5 hours. I'll tell you how I look at this in the simplest form. And one of the frameworks should sound familiar if you've read the 4-Hour Workweek, 80-20 analysis. I will look at, and I do this in fact, instead of, for instance, New Year's resolutions, I do a review of my entire calendar, previous year, week by week, for, in this case, we just came into 2018. I'll look at 2017 and I will make a list, in fact, 2 lists of the 20% of people and activities who produced 80% of my peak positive emotional states. That's one list. The other side, the 20% of people or activities that produced 80% of my peak negative emotional states. And it could be as simple as frustration. And what this will help you to put together, it doesn't have to be at the end of the year, is a to-do list or a to-focus list and then a not-to-do list. All right. And I tend to focus on, these days at least, taking disagreeable tasks or distracting tasks and first trying to automate them with software, auto pay, whatever it might be, right? A repeating schedule with a TaskRabbit, for instance, for physical pickup or anything like that. Perhaps you do that through a UPS store that scans and then emails your documents or Earth Class Mail. Use technology whenever possible instead of brute force with humans, right? Even if there are humans involved in conjunction with the technology. So I'll try to automate as much as possible first. Then, if we're looking at delegating, which frequently includes technology, again, I'll try to remove the negative as much as possible, especially with repeating tasks. That is the lowest hanging fruit. Then, I will look at my primary projects for a given period of time. And if you have, let's just say 4 or 5 projects you could pursue or that are in play in your life, I will narrow it down by asking which of these projects, if moved ahead to the next milestone, or if completed, will make all of the rest either irrelevant or make all of the rest easier. And I've done this, in fact, recently in the last week. Then we have a primary focus. This is the lead domino that will make everything else easier. I will throw as much at that as possible. So let's just say hypothetically, we are trying to design a website. In some cases, you want to throw money at a problem. It doesn't have to necessarily be a lot of money, but throw money at a problem instead of time. Time is non-renewable. So I will say, go to 99 Designs and get 50 different submissions to brainstorm ideas for a potential website. Hire perhaps 2 firms and have them all at the same time working on designs so that I can save time and move this project ahead as quickly as possible with as few stops as possible. If, for instance, I need a legal opinion, all right, well, I'm going to look for a consensus. I'm going to look for gaps to be filled by different people. I will very frequently have 2 or 3 people work on that at the same time and then gather their responses. Again, just to quickly review, the not-to-do list based on the 20% of activities and people that tend to produce 80% of my negative emotional states. And then the to-do list based on looking at your list of projects and identifying
the project that will make the others either irrelevant, unnecessary to do, or easier. That is the lead domino, and then I throw as much as possible at that, which does not need to cost a lot of money. And certainly for me has not cost a lot of money, even when I was, I'm not going to say in the poorhouse, but really, really scraping by on very little. You can still find ways to do it because there is talent both overseas, domestically, and there are many different types of software that can help you to smooth out and simplify process to make them much more elegant. What is batching? To explain it in simplest terms, we can talk about laundry. All right, so you wouldn't do your laundry every time you have a new pair of dirty socks. You wait for a certain critical mass of dirty laundry to accumulate, and then you do the laundry. Why? Same with the post office. If you have many different types of mail that are going to come together that you need to mail, you're going to wait for a certain critical mass as opposed to just going there for every single letter, because there's a setup cost. There is a task switching cost, getting in the car, driving there, spending the gas, spending the time, laundry, putting it all together, detergent, and so on. Right? So the time and labor involved in doing one letter or 20 or one pair of socks or an entire basket of clothing is the same. And you want to be both effective and efficient with your allocation of resources, i.e. time. If you apply those to business, you can apply them in 1,000,001 different ways. And I'll give you a few examples. One of the most common, I suppose, directional questions or specifics that I'm asked about is frequency. Well, do I batch on a daily basis? Do I batch on a weekly basis? Do I batch on a monthly or quarterly basis? And the answer is I do all of those things. But you don't have to try it all at once. And I would not encourage you do that. I would encourage you to perhaps try one or two approaches and see what works for you. This is a very personal set of techniques. You develop a portfolio that works for yourself. Let me tell you a few things that I and others do. For instance, you might decide that on a given day, from the time you wake up until lunch is your primary creation period. This could be writing, it could be recording, it could be anything that is proactively creative and synthesis. Then, once you have lunch, you are permitted to do administrative tasks, phone calls, email, triage, calendaring, and so on. I do this quite a lot, particularly from Tuesday to Thursday on certain weeks. On a weekly basis, I know the CEO of a very well-known startup, pretty much everyone watching this would know this company, and instead of batching on a daily basis, looking at his week, Monday to Friday, he might have day 1, administrative tasks, day 2, HR hiring, day 3, product, day 4, marketing. And on each of those days, he will focus on thematically or categorically those types of tasks. That is yet another approach. And very commonly, I will batch phone calls on Mondays and Fridays. And I would say even broadly speaking, this is voice-related tasks. So I will have phone calls and podcast recording on Mondays and Fridays. And this helps to prevent also interruptions and task switching that can result if you have miscellaneous phone calls and podcasts scattered throughout the week. Makes it very difficult to do deep work on anything that might require 3 to 5 hours of uninterrupted time. On a quarterly basis, you could look at batch producing or completing certain types of normally scattered activities. For instance, I am recording this video right now during a content generation week, where a week is blocked out once per quarter to focus on answering common questions that all of you or my readers or listeners have asked, and so on and so forth. On a, say, 6-month to yearly basis, I have started in the last few years batching travel. Why would I batch travel? And there are many different reasons to batch travel. One of my reasons is that I want to practice being off the grid for extended periods of time to not only remind myself and prove to myself that it is possible to do that, and no, the internet will not stop, the universe will not end if you are unavailable and unreachable for certain periods of time, and also to rejuvenate, to recharge, being away from social media and keyboards, laptops, screens, and so on. Batching is one of the fundamental concepts that you need to understand. If you understand the principle,
the reasons for it, the concepts, you can come up with your own examples to experiment with. And these are not permanent changes. Think of them as 2-week experiments. One tiny thing that you can test, assuming that it's on a daily or weekly basis, and try it out. See what works. Keep what works, reject what doesn't, add what is uniquely your own, borrowing from Bruce Lee with that. And before you know it, you will have a reliable, dependable way of making yourself more effective and more efficient, which is your bespoke iteration of batching. Being a good student is a coachable skill. And I gave up on so many things in life, whether that was basketball. I concluded I was bad at languages in 9th grade and so on and so forth. And I think so many people run into this where they abandon things and they accept a partial completeness where they're like, my voice just isn't good. I'm just not good at X. And usually if you track that back, it's because a parent or a teacher or some authority figure criticized you really heavily. And it turns out that if you just get a better toolkit, sort of a better set of questions, that you can do things that seem impossible to the untrained, right? So you could teach someone to, say, memorize a shuffled deck of cards in less than 60 seconds with about 2 weeks of training. Like, you literally using the right software, you could get someone past the former American record in 2 weeks or less. But you show that to someone and it looks like a Rain Man-like skill, but it's all coachable.
Because you made it this far in a video, I want to celebrate you. Most people start and don't finish. Most people never actually follow through. Most people say they want something, but they don't ever do the work to actually get it. But you are different. You are special. Believe Nation, you made it here all the way to the end, and I love you. So as a special celebration, if you put a hashtag believe down in the comments below on this video, I will showcase you and celebrate you somewhere on the screen in a future video because you are awesome. For 10 more amazing rules from Tom Bilyeu, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
The reason that I've had the kind of success that I've had in my life is simply because I understand that iteration is how we make cultural progress. It's what I call the physics of progress. Most people, when they're running